My name is Delia. I'm 32 years old, and I've spent my entire career as a pediatric nurse caring for sick children. The irony wasn't lost on me when my own daughter Lily was diagnosed with severe asthma at just 3 years old. But nothing prepared me for the day my parents abandoned my 5-year-old daughter in the hospital to attend my brother's birthday celebration. My mother's words still haunt me. She'll be fine. But John's birthday? That's once a year. Before I continue with my story, let me know where you're watching from, hit the like button, and subscribe if you've ever felt that painful sting of family betrayal. I grew up in a modest suburban home in Michigan with parents who made it abundantly clear that their son was the prize of the family. John was 4 years younger than me, and from the moment he arrived, I might as well have become invisible. Every achievement of mine was measured against the potential of what John might someday accomplish. When I brought home straight A's on my report card, my parents would nod and place it on the refrigerator. When John brought home C's, they would celebrate with ice cream and proclaim how proud they were that he was trying his best. This pattern continued throughout our childhood. I learned to find validation elsewhere. My teachers recognized my aptitude for science and encouraged me to pursue medicine. I threw myself into my studies, hoping that perhaps academic excellence would finally earn me the approval I craved from my parents. But no matter how high I soared, John's mediocrity always seemed to cast a longer shadow. By the time I graduated high school as valedictorian, I had accepted that my accomplishments would never be enough. My graduation party was a small affair in our backyard, while months earlier, John's middle school graduation had warranted renting out a local banquet hall. My speech that day wasn't just for my classmates. It was a declaration of independence. I was going to build a life where I was valued. I received a partial scholarship to nursing school and worked 2 jobs to cover the rest. My parents contributed to John's college fund from the day he was born, but for me, they claimed finances were too tight. "You're so smart and capable," my mother would say, as if my capability justified their neglect. "John needs more support." During my second year of nursing school, I met Adam. He was studying physical therapy with kind eyes and an easy laugh that made the weight of my family dynamics feel lighter. For the first time, someone put me first. We moved into a tiny apartment together after dating for a year. My parents disapproved not because they were protective, but because they thought I could do better than a mere physical therapist. Meanwhile, they celebrated when John dropped out of community college to find himself. Adam and I were careful, but life had other plans. I discovered I was pregnant during my final year of nursing school. When I called my parents with the news, my mother's first response wasn't congratulations, but concern about how this would affect my ability to help John, who had by then cycled through 3 different majors. Adam stood by me promising we would make it work. I graduated with honors 8 months pregnant, waddling across the stage to receive my diploma. My parents attended but left early because John had a recreational softball game. Lily was born on a rainy April morning, perfect in every way, with a dusting of dark hair and curious eyes that seemed to take in everything. Adam was smitten, and for a few months we were a family. But the strain of new parenthood, our careers, and financial pressure began to crack our foundation. When Lily was 6 months old, Adam confessed he wasn't ready for fatherhood. He moved out the following weekend, leaving me alone with our daughter and a stack of bills. I called my parents in tears, hoping that perhaps my vulnerability would finally awaken their parental instinct. They allowed us to move into their guest room temporarily, but their support came with constant reminders of my poor life choices. Meanwhile, John moved back home after another failed semester, occupying his childhood bedroom, which was still preserved exactly as he left it, filled with trophies from participation awards and posters of bands long since disbanded. During our 6 months living with my parents, I secured a position as a pediatric nurse at the local children's hospital. The irony wasn't lost on me that I could provide more compassion to strangers' children than my parents had ever shown me. I saved every penny and found a small but safe apartment closer to the hospital. When I announced we were moving out, my mother seemed almost relieved, commenting that Lily's early morning wake-ups were disturbing John's sleep schedule as he prepared for job interviews. It was shortly after Lily turned 3 that I noticed something wasn't right. She seemed to struggle with breathing after playing at the park, developing a persistent cough that worsened at night. As a nurse, my instincts went on high alert. Several doctor visits later, Lily was diagnosed with severe asthma. The specialist explained that while it could be managed with proper medication and avoiding triggers, it was a serious condition that would require vigilant care. When I shared the diagnosis with my parents, my father frowned and asked if this would impact our ability to attend John's art show the following month. He had recently discovered painting and had convinced my parents to fund an exhibition of his work. My mother suggested that perhaps Lily's condition was psychosomatic, a result of growing up without a father. I left their house that day with the bitter realization that even my daughter's health couldn't compete with John's latest hobby. From that point on, I limited our visits with my parents, although I never cut them off completely. Despite everything, I wanted Lily to have grandparents, and during the rare moments when they did pay attention to her, she bloomed under their affection. I held on to hope that perhaps through Lily, they might finally learn to open their hearts. But old patterns die hard, and as the years passed, the disparity in how they treated us versus John only seemed to grow more pronounced. While I worked 12-hour shifts, managed Lily's medical care, and built us a stable life, my parents continued to subsidize John's meandering path through adulthood. Each holiday, each family gathering became an exercise in swallowing my hurt for Lily's sake. As Lily's 5th birthday approached, I allowed myself to hope that perhaps this milestone would be different. That my parents would finally see the beautiful, resilient child I was raising and celebrate her with the enthusiasm they reserved for John's every whim. I couldn't have known then how cruelly that hope would be shattered, or that their choices would finally force me to draw a line that could never be uncrossed. Despite the challenges, I had managed to build a life for Lily and myself that felt stable and even happy at times. Our apartment wasn't large, but I'd transformed it into a home filled with Lily's artwork and photographs of our adventures together. On my days off, we would visit the local park or museum, and I treasured watching her curiosity about the world around her. My position at the Children's Hospital had evolved from a new graduate nurse to a respected member of the pediatric respiratory team. The irony wasn't lost on me that I specialized in the very condition that affected my daughter. My colleagues valued my input, and I found purpose in being able to comfort parents who received diagnoses similar to Lily's. I understood their fear in a way that went beyond medical training. Lily had started kindergarten that fall, and despite my worries about her health, she was thriving. Her teacher, Ms. Thompson, kept a rescue inhaler in her desk and had been trained on its use, giving me peace of mind during the hours we were apart. Lily made friends easily with her bright imagination and kind heart qualities I prided myself on nurturing, despite my own childhood, where such traits were overshadowed by John's needs. Managing Lily's asthma became an intricate dance of medication schedules, environmental awareness, and constant vigilance. I kept detailed journals of her symptoms, tracking patterns and triggers that might provoke an attack. Weather changes, certain foods, strong scents all became factors in our daily calculations. Most days, her maintenance medications kept her breathing steady, her laughter uninhibited. It was during a particularly challenging week of short staffing at the hospital that I met Sarah. She transferred from another unit to help cover shifts, and we connected immediately over shared gallows humor and a commitment to our patients. When she learned I was a single mother, she offered to exchange numbers in case I ever needed backup childcare. The offer was so genuine that I nearly cried on the spot, unused to such straightforward kindness. Sarah became a fixture in our lives, stopping by with dinner on nights she knew I'd worked a double shift, or offering to take Lily to the park when I needed to catch up on sleep. Her own children were teenagers, giving her a perspective on parenting that I found invaluable. She never asked for anything in return, though I tried to reciprocate whenever possible. For the first time since Adam left, I felt like I had family support, even if it wasn't from my actual family. With Sarah's encouragement, I made another attempt to improve relations with my parents. Perhaps if they saw how well Lily and I were doing, they might finally offer the emotional support I'd craved my entire life. I invited them to Lily's school play, where she had 3 whole lines as a talking tree. To my surprise, they attended, though they spent most of the performance checking their phones and left immediately after Lily's scene without saying goodbye. Still, I persisted. I arranged Sunday dinners at my apartment once a month, cooking elaborate meals and encouraging Lily to share stories about school. My parents would nod politely, occasionally asking her questions, but inevitably, the conversation would turn to John. How he'd just returned from a backpacking trip through Europe that they'd helped finance. How he was considering going back to school for a 5th different degree. How a gallery in a neighboring town was considering his artwork, though nothing had materialized yet. I swallowed my resentment and focused on the fact that Lily seemed to enjoy these visits nonetheless. She was too young to understand the imbalance, innocently soaking up whatever attention her grandparents offered. After they would leave, she would ask when we could see them again, and I never had the heart to explain why I needed days to recover from these brief encounters. The dynamic shifted slightly when John announced his 30th birthday was approaching. My parents immediately began planning an elaborate celebration, talking about it during our Sunday dinners, with an excitement they'd never shown for any event in my life. They reserved a venue, hired a caterer, and commissioned a professional photographer. When I mentioned that Lily's birthday was the month before John's, they waved away my comment, suggesting we could do something small for her at their house. Despite the familiar sting, I allowed myself to hope that perhaps this family gathering could be different. John had recently started dating a woman named Alicia, who seemed to have a stabilizing effect on him. Maybe his birthday could be an opportunity for our family to turn a corner, to begin building the kind of supportive relationships I'd always wished for. As John's birthday approached, Lily grew excited about the party, asking if she could wear her fancy dress, and if there would be other children to play with. I managed her expectations, gently explaining that it was an adult party, but that she could help make a special gift for her Uncle John. We spent an evening creating a hand-painted picture frame, with Lily carefully adding glitter to the edges, while I inserted a photo of John with Lily from Christmas. Looking at it, you would never know he'd spent only 20 minutes with her that day before leaving to meet friends. The day we finished the gift, Michigan's notoriously fickle spring weather took a sharp turn. Temperatures dropped, and rain set in a combination that historically triggered Lily's asthma. I increased her preventative medications as a precaution and kept her indoor recess note updated with her school. That night, I heard the slight wheeze in her breathing as I kissed her goodnight, a sound that always sent a chill through me, despite my medical training. I placed her nebulizer beside her bed, just in case. When I called my parents the next day to warn them that Lily might be having difficulty if the weather persisted through John's party, my mother sighed audibly. "Delia, you always worry so much. Children get colds all the time. John's having his celebration outdoors since the venue has that beautiful garden area and we've already paid the deposit." "Mom, this isn't a cold. Lily has a medical condition and damp outdoor air is a major trigger. Maybe we could just stay for the dinner portion and leave before they move the party outside." "You're being overprotective again. Besides, John specifically requested that the garden be part of the celebration. The light is better for photos there, and you know how important his social media presence is for his art career." The conversation ended with my mother extracting a promise that I would help decorate the venue the morning of the party. I agreed reluctantly, hoping that the weather might improve by then. Later that evening, I received a text from my father informing me that they'd decided to hold the entire celebration in the garden area, weather permitting, as it would create a more cohesive aesthetic. As the party drew closer, Lily's symptoms remained manageable but present. A slight wheeze here, an extra puff of her inhaler there. I considered backing out of the party entirely, but knew the fallout would be substantial. Instead, I packed extra medications, made sure her action plan was updated, and prepared to monitor her closely throughout the event. The night before John's birthday, my parents called with a last-minute request. The centerpieces they'd ordered had arrived in the wrong color, and would I mind creating new ones? They knew I was crafty, and it would mean so much to John. I agreed, spending hours after Lily went to bed arranging flowers, cutting ribbons, and assembling decorative elements that matched John's specified color scheme. By the time I finished, it was past midnight, and I collapsed into bed with the alarm set for 6 a.m. to finish preparations for the party. The sound that woke me wasn't my alarm, but Lily's labored breathing from the next room. I jolted awake at 4:30 a.m., immediately recognizing the distinctive sound of Lily struggling for air. Racing to her room, I found her sitting upright in bed, her little chest heaving with each breath, fear evident in her wide eyes. "Mommy," she gasped. "I can't breathe good." My nurse training kicked in alongside my maternal instinct. I grabbed her rescue inhaler from the bedside table, helped her take 2 puffs, and set up her nebulizer with albuterol solution. As the medication misted into the air, I stroked her hair and monitored her oxygen levels with the small pulse oximeter I kept at home. "Deep breaths, baby," I coached, keeping my voice calm despite the panic rising in my chest. "In through your nose, out through your mouth, just like we practice." Her oxygen saturation was hovering around 89% lower than I was comfortable with. After finishing the nebulizer treatment, her breathing eased slightly, but not enough. Making a quick decision, I called her pediatrician's after-hours line. Dr. Martinez called back within minutes. After I described Lily's symptoms and vitals, she didn't hesitate. "Take her to the emergency department, Delia. This sounds like a significant exacerbation." I packed a small bag with Lily's medications, her favorite stuffed rabbit, and a change of clothes. As I helped her into her coat, I realized I needed to let my parents know about the situation. The venue decoration was scheduled for 9 a.m., just 4 hours away. My father answered on the 4th ring, his voice thick with sleep. "What is it, Delia? Do you know what time it is?" "Dad, I'm sorry to call so early, but Lily's having a severe asthma attack. I'm taking her to the hospital. I won't be able to help with the decorations this morning." There was a pause then. "Today of all days, John's party starts at 3. Everything needs to be perfect." I swallowed hard, trying to contain my disbelief. "Dad, my daughter can't breathe. This is serious." "Let me get your mother." I heard rustling, muffled voices. Then my mother came on the line. "Delia, are you sure this isn't something you can handle at home? You're a nurse after all. John's been planning this day for months." "Mom, her oxygen level is dropping. This isn't something I can manage with home treatments. She needs to be seen by a doctor." My mother sighed. "Well, I suppose you have to take her in then. But you'll still make it to the party, right? John will be so disappointed if you're not there." "I don't know, Mom. It depends on how Lily responds to treatment. A severe asthma attack can take hours to resolve, sometimes days, if it's bad enough." "Days? But you promised John you'd be there. You're already letting him down with the decorations." I glanced at Lily, who was leaning against the wall, her breathing still labored tears forming in her eyes. "I have to go, Mom. I'll update you from the hospital." As I hung up, Lily looked up at me. "Are Grandma and Grandpa mad?" I forced a smile. "They're just worried about you, sweetie. Come on, Let's get you to the doctor so you can feel better." The drive to the hospital was tense, with me constantly checking the rearview mirror to monitor Lily. Upon arrival at the emergency department, I identified myself as a pediatric nurse and explained Lily's condition. My colleagues quickly ushered us into a treatment room where Dr. Wilson, a respiratory specialist I'd worked with many times, took over. "Significant bronchospasm," he noted after examining her. "Let's start with continuous albuterol intravenous corticosteroids and supplemental oxygen." I watched as they placed an oxygen mask over Lily's small face. Her frightened eyes locked with mine, and I held her hand tightly. "You're doing so great, brave girl. These medicines will help you breathe easier." An hour passed with incremental improvement. Lily's oxygen levels stabilized with supplemental oxygen, but her breathing remained labored. Dr. Wilson decided to admit her for continued monitoring and treatment. "We'll need to keep her at least overnight," he explained. "The steroids take time to reduce the airway inflammation, and she still needs respiratory support." As they prepared to transfer Lily to the pediatric ward, I called my parents again. By now it was 7:30 a.m., and I knew they would be awake and preparing for John's celebration. "She's being admitted," I explained, trying to keep the exhaustion from my voice. "The attack is severe. They're saying she'll need to stay overnight at minimum." "Overnight?" My mother's voice rose. "But what about the party?" "Mom, I can't leave Lily alone in the hospital. She's 5 years old and scared." "Well, perhaps your father and I could come sit with her for a little while this morning, and then you could attend the party for at least an hour or two. John specifically mentioned wanting photos with you for social media." The suggestion was so inappropriate that I was momentarily speechless. "Are you serious right now? My daughter is in the hospital with a condition that could become life-threatening if not properly managed. I'm not leaving her for a birthday party." "You're being dramatic again, Delia. The hospital is full of capable doctors and nurses. It's not like you're the only one who can take care of her." I ended the call abruptly, too angry to continue the conversation. As the morning progressed, Lily was settled into a pediatric room, connected to monitors and receiving a steady flow of medication. Her breathing was slightly improved, but she remained on oxygen and was visibly exhausted from the effort of breathing. Around 10 a.m., to my surprise, my parents appeared in the doorway of Lily's room. My mother was dressed in an elegant outfit, clearly already prepared for the party, while my father checked his watch repeatedly. "See, we made time to come," my mother announced, as if deserving special recognition. "How is she doing?" "She's stable, but still having significant difficulty," I explained, keeping my voice low, as Lily had finally drifted off to sleep. My father glanced at the monitors. "Those numbers look fine to me. When do you think they'll discharge her?" "Dad, she's on supplemental oxygen and continuous medication. These aren't normal readings, they're acceptable because she's receiving intensive treatment." My mother perched on the edge of a chair, careful not to wrinkle her dress. "Well, we can stay for about an hour. That should give you time to run home and change for the party. We brought your dress, actually." She gestured to a garment bag my father was holding. I stared at them in disbelief. "I'm not going to the party. Lily needs me here." "Delia, be reasonable. The hospital staff can monitor her. It's not like you're doing anything medical yourself right now. And John will be so hurt if you don't show up." "I'm not leaving my daughter alone in the hospital." My mother's expression hardened. "You've always been like this, so intense about everything. Remember when John had his tonsils out when he was 12? We still attended your aunt's wedding that weekend." "And I stayed with him at the hospital," I reminded her. "You left me a 16-year-old to care for my brother while you went to the wedding." My father checked his watch again. "We need to head out soon if we're going to finalize the arrangements before guests arrive." I looked between them, suddenly realizing they had no intention of staying with Lily, let alone missing the party themselves. "So you came here just to try to convince me to leave my sick child and attend John's party?" "We came to help," my mother insisted. But there's nothing for us to do here, and we have responsibilities to John. You know how sensitive he is. His 30th birthday is a milestone. Lily stirred in the hospital bed, her oxygen mask slightly askew. I moved to adjust it, and she blinked up at me with tired eyes. "Grandma, Grandpa?" she whispered. My mother moved closer, careful to maintain distance from the medical equipment. "Hello, darling. Feeling better?" Lily nodded slightly. "Are you staying with me and Mommy?" An uncomfortable silence filled the room. My father cleared his throat. "Actually, sweetie, Grandma and Grandpa have to go to Uncle John's birthday party. It's a very important day for him." Lily's face fell, but she nodded again, a response that broke my heart. Even at 5, she had already learned to accept disappointment from her grandparents. "Maybe Mommy can come to the party and we can visit you after," my mother suggested, looking at me expectantly. Before I could respond, Dr. Wilson entered the room to check on Lily. After examining her and reviewing her vitals, he turned to me. "She's responding to treatment, but I'm still concerned about her work of breathing. We'll need to continue close monitoring through the night." My parents exchanged glances. "Well," my father said, "it seems like everything is under control here. We should get going." "You're leaving?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "We've got a busy day ahead," my mother replied, gathering her purse. "John's guests will start arriving in a few hours, and there's still so much to do." They said brief goodbyes to Lily, promising to bring her cake the next day. As they reached the door, my mother turned back. "Think about coming even for a little while. Family should be together for important occasions." After they left, I sat beside Lily's bed, holding her small hand as she dozed fitfully. An hour later, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from my mother. "She seems stable. We need to get to John's party. She'll be fine. But John's birthday? That's once a year. Try to make it if you can." I stared at the message, a cold realization washing over me. In their eyes, Lily's health emergency was an inconvenience, a disruption to their plans for their golden child. Not once had they asked how I was holding up if I needed anything, or offered genuine support. Even in crisis, John remained the priority. I turned off my phone, focusing entirely on Lily. As a nurse, I knew we weren't out of the woods yet. As a mother, I knew there was nowhere else in the world I would be than by her side. And as a daughter, I was beginning to understand that some family bonds exist only in name, not in substance. Hours passed in the rhythmic beeping of hospital monitors. Lily drifted in and out of sleep, each awakening accompanied by a hopeful glance toward the door, before disappointment settled over her features again. It tore at my heart, knowing she was waiting for grandparents who had chosen a party over her well-being. As evening approached, Lily's condition stabilized enough that she could sit up and take small sips of water. The oxygen mask had been replaced with nasal cannula, a positive sign, though she still required continuous medication through her IV. "Mommy," she asked, her voice raspy from the treatments, "is Uncle John's party fun?" I smoothed her hair back from her forehead. "I'm sure it is, sweetie." "Do you wish you were there instead of here with me?" The question knocked the wind from me. "Absolutely not. There is nowhere in the world I'd rather be than right here with you. You are always my first priority, Lily. Always." Her small face relaxed slightly. "Even though it's boring here. Even though," I assured her, blinking back tears. "Want to hear a secret? You're much better company than Uncle John anyway." That earned me a tiny smile before she drifted off again. I sat watching her chest rise and fall, each breath a little less labored than the last, and felt the first stirrings of genuine anger beneath my exhaustion. For years, I had accepted my role in the family dynamic, had made excuses for my parents' behavior, had tried to shelter Lily from the reality that her grandparents would always prioritize her uncle. But this was different. This was a medical emergency, and they had abandoned her. Around 8 p.m., the door to Lily's room opened, but instead of my parents, it was Sarah, my co-worker and friend, still in scrubs from her shift. "I heard Lily was admitted," she said quietly, setting down a small gift bag. "Thought you both could use some company." The simple kindness broke something in me, and tears began streaming down my face. Sarah moved quickly to my side, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "What is it? Has her condition worsened?" Between sobs, I explained the situation with my parents and John's birthday party. Sarah's expression shifted from concern to disbelief to anger. "They left her here to attend a birthday party." She shook her head. "Delia, that's not normal. You know that, right? That's not how family is supposed to treat each other." "I know," I whispered. "I've always known, but I kept hoping they would change, that they would see Lily and love her the way she deserves to be loved." Sarah stayed with us for hours, sharing the snacks she'd brought, helping me coax Lily to take her medication, and providing adult conversation that kept me from spiraling further into my thoughts. When she finally had to leave, she made me promise to call if I needed anything at all. "My kids are teenagers now. They barely notice if I'm home or not," she joked. "I can be here in 20 minutes anytime." After Sarah left, I checked my phone for the first time in hours. There were no messages from my parents, no calls to check on Lily's condition. But there were multiple notifications from social media. Without thinking, I opened the first one. It was a series of photos from John's party posted by my mother. Elegant decorations, beautifully arranged food, and dozens of guests raising glasses and toast. The caption read, "Perfect family celebration for our son's 30th. Couldn't be prouder of the man he's become." I scrolled through more posts. Photo after photo of my parents beaming beside John, cutting cake, opening gifts. Not a single mention of Lily's hospitalization, not the slightest hint that anything was amiss in their perfect family narrative. In one particularly painful image, my mother embraced John's girlfriend, Alicia, with the caption, "Welcoming this beautiful girl to our family. John always deserves the best." The comment section was filled with congratulations, including one from my father suggesting they were already looking forward to planning an engagement party. I set the phone down, a strange calm settling over me. The disparity was so stark, so undeniable, that it couldn't be rationalized away any longer. In one hospital room, their granddaughter fought to breathe. Across town, they celebrated without a second thought. Lily stirred her monitors, showing increased heart rate. "Mommy, are you okay?" I wiped away tears I hadn't realized I'd shed. "I'm fine, baby. Just tired." "Did Grandma and Grandpa call?" "Not yet, but it's late. The party probably ran long." She nodded, accepting this explanation with the easy trust of childhood. "Can we call them tomorrow? I want to know if they liked my present." The present. In the rush to get to the hospital, the hand-painted frame had been left on our kitchen table. Another commitment to John unfulfilled, another reason for my parents to express disappointment in me. "Of course we can," I promised, though something had shifted inside me. This wouldn't be a call seeking their approval or begging for attention. This would be something else entirely. Morning brought significant improvement in Lily's condition. Her oxygen levels were nearly normal on reduced supplemental flow, and her breathing was markedly less labored. Dr. Wilson expressed cautious optimism during rounds. "If she continues this trajectory, we might be able to discharge her tomorrow morning. She'll need close monitoring at home and a follow-up with her specialist, but the worst seems to have passed." Relief washed over me, though exhaustion from the sleepless night left me feeling hollowed out. As I helped Lily eat some breakfast, my phone rang. It was my mother. "Hello, Delia. How is Lily doing today?" Her tone was casual, as if inquiring about a mild cold, rather than a serious asthma attack that had required hospitalization. "She's better," I replied stiffly. "The doctor thinks she might be discharged tomorrow." "Wonderful news. The party went beautifully, by the way. John was so happy, though he did mention being disappointed that you weren't there." Not a word of regret for leaving Lily, not a hint of recognition that they had abandoned their granddaughter in the hospital. "Did John like the gift Lily made him?" I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "Oh, we didn't see any gift. Did you leave it somewhere? It was on our kitchen table. We were a bit preoccupied with the medical emergency to remember to grab it on our way out." A pause. "Well, I'm sure you can give it to him another time. Listen, your father and I were thinking we could stop by the hospital this afternoon after brunch. Alicia's parents are in town, and we're all meeting at that new place downtown." "Don't bother," I said, surprising myself with the coldness in my voice. "We're managing just fine without you." Another pause, longer this time. "Delia, I detect a note of resentment. You know how important yesterday was for John. We would have stayed if the situation had been truly critical." "Truly critical," I repeated. My 5-year-old daughter couldn't breathe. She was on continuous oxygen and medication. What exactly would you consider truly critical? Mom, would she have needed to be unconscious, on a ventilator? "You're being dramatic again. She had medical professionals caring for her, and clearly she's fine now." "She's fine because she received proper medical care and had at least one parent who didn't abandon her for a birthday party." I took a breath. "We need to talk, but not over the phone. After Lily is discharged, we'll be coming by the house." "Well, tomorrow isn't good. We're helping John move some new furniture. Perhaps next weekend." "Tomorrow," I insisted. "This isn't optional." After ending the call, I turned to find Lily watching me, her eyes wide. I forced a smile, wondering how much she had understood of the conversation. "Grandma and Grandpa had a good time at Uncle John's party," I told her, keeping my tone light. "They're glad you're feeling better." Lily nodded, but her expression remained solemn. "They didn't want to stay with me yesterday." It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact, delivered with the simple clarity of childhood. In that moment, I realized that while I had been trying to protect Lily from the truth about my parents, she had been quietly observing and understanding far more than I'd given her credit for. "No, they didn't," I admitted softly. "And that wasn't right of them." "Is it because they love Uncle John more than me?" The question pierced me like a physical pain. "It's not about loving you less, Lily. Grandma and Grandpa just have trouble sometimes showing love the way they should. But that's their problem, not yours. You are perfectly lovable exactly as you are." She seemed to consider this, then asked, "Do you have to go places when I'm sick?" "Never," I promised fiercely. "You will always come first with me, Lily. Always." As she settled back against her pillows, I made a silent vow that whatever happened next, I would ensure that Lily grew up knowing her worth, even if that meant redefining what family meant for us. The next morning, Lily was discharged with a prescription for oral steroids, an updated asthma action plan, and instructions for a follow-up appointment. As we drove from the hospital toward my parents' house, I rehearsed what I wanted to say, trying to find words that would make them understand the depth of their betrayal, without devolving into accusations that would only make them defensive. When we arrived, John's car was in the driveway alongside my parents. I hadn't expected him to be there, but perhaps it was fitting. This confrontation had been years in the making, and it involved all of us. My mother answered the door in a gardening apron, looking surprised despite our conversation the previous day. "Delia, Lily, we weren't expecting you quite so early." "We came straight from the hospital," I explained, guiding Lily inside with a hand on her shoulder. The living room revealed my father and John sorting through boxes of what appeared to be new electronics. "Look who's here," my mother announced. "Lily's been discharged from the hospital." My father glanced up briefly. Good to hear. John just got a new gaming system. We're setting it up for him. John barely acknowledged our presence, continuing to unpack his new device. Hey, how's the kid? Her name is Lily, I said, and she's recovering from a serious asthma attack that put her in the hospital while you were celebrating your birthday. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. My mother cleared her throat. Would anyone like some tea? I just made a fresh pot. I don't want tea, Mom. I want an explanation. I want to understand how you could leave your 5-year-old granddaughter alone in the hospital to attend a birthday party. John rolled his eyes. Here we go again. Delia the martyr making everything dramatic. I turned to him, years of suppressed anger finally finding voice. Dramatic? My daughter couldn't breathe. She was on oxygen and continuous medication. While you were blowing out candles, she was fighting to get enough air into her lungs. The hospital called us with updates, my father interjected. We knew she was in stable condition. That's a lie, I shot back. I was with her the entire time. The hospital never called you because I never gave them your number as contact persons. You didn't care enough to call yourselves. My mother's face tightened. We were busy with John's celebration. We would have called afterward if we'd had concerns. That's exactly the problem, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. John's birthday party took precedence over Lily's health emergency. Do you have any idea what message that sends to her? To me? You're overreacting, John cut in. Kids get sick all the time. It's not like she was dying. I stared at him in disbelief. You have no idea how serious asthma can be. And even if it had been a minor illness, what kind of uncle, what kind of grandparents choose a party over a sick child? The kind who understand balance, my mother replied. John's 30th birthday was a once-in-a-lifetime event. We couldn't just cancel everything because Lily had an asthma flare. Balance, I repeated. There has never been balance in this family. My entire life, John has been the priority. My accomplishments were footnotes. His mediocrity was celebrated. I accepted that for myself, but I will not accept it for my daughter. My father stood, his expression hardening. That's enough, Delia. We've supported you through everything, including your poor decision to have a child with a man who abandoned you both. We took you in when you had nowhere else to go. For 6 months, I corrected. 6 months during which you reminded me daily what a burden we were, how we were disrupting John's life by occupying the guest room. John snorted. You were kind of a pain bringing a crying baby into the house. I couldn't focus on my art with all that noise. I turned to him, suddenly seeing him clearly, perhaps for the first time. Not the little brother I had protected and loved despite our parents' favoritism, but a grown man who had been enabled his entire life to believe the world revolved around him. Your art, I said quietly. John, you've been focusing on your art for a decade with nothing to show for it except pieces our parents pay to display. You've never held a job for more than 6 months. You've never supported yourself. You've never had to make a difficult choice or sacrifice anything for someone else. That's rich coming from you, he sneered. Little Miss Perfect who never does anything wrong. I work 12-hour shifts caring for sick children. I raise my daughter alone. I pay my bills, manage a medical condition, and built a life for us without help. I'm not perfect, but I am responsible. My mother stepped between us. This isn't productive. We all love Lily Delia, but you have to understand that we have obligations to John too. What obligations, Mom? What has John ever done to earn the devotion you show him? What has he ever given back? I shouldn't have to earn their love, John protested. They're my parents. Exactly, I said, the pieces finally clicking into place. Neither should I. Neither should Lily. But we've spent our lives trying to earn what comes to you automatically. I looked between my parents, seeing the stubborn denial in their expressions, the refusal to acknowledge any fault in their treatment of us. I want you to understand something. I continued, my voice steadier now. When you left Lily in that hospital to attend a birthday party, you made a choice. You chose John over your granddaughter. And now I'm making a choice too. Until you can acknowledge what you did and show genuine remorse, until you can demonstrate that you value Lily's well-being as much as you value John's convenience, we will not be part of your lives. You can't keep Lily from us, my father protested. We're her grandparents. Being a grandparent is more than biology, Dad. It's showing up. It's putting a child's needs above your own desires. It's what you failed to do repeatedly. John stood knocking over an empty box. This is ridiculous. You're just jealous because Mom and Dad love me more. The statement hung in the air, its naked truth startling even John himself, who looked immediately uncomfortable. You're right, I acknowledged, surprising all of them. They do love you more. They always have. And that's their right, however painful it's been for me. But Lily deserves better. She deserves grandparents who will sit with her in a hospital, who will celebrate her achievements, who will put her well-being above a party. I took Lily's hand, who had been watching this exchange with solemn eyes. We're leaving now. When you're ready to be the family Lily deserves, you know where to find us. As we walked toward the door, my mother called after us. Delia, you're being unreasonable. Families should stick together. I turned back one last time. That's exactly what I'm doing, Mom. I'm prioritizing the family member who needs me most. I'm breaking a cycle that would teach my daughter that she matters less than her uncle. I'm choosing Lily just as you've always chosen John. With that, we walked out the door, Lily's small hand firm in mine. As we drove away, she looked up at me with questions in her eyes. Are Grandma and Grandpa mad at us now? They're upset, I answered honestly. But sometimes adults need to set boundaries, which means saying what kind of behavior you will and won't accept from others. Like when Tyler at school had to sit in timeout for pushing. I smiled slightly at her simplification. Something like that. Grandma and Grandpa made choices that weren't kind to you, and I need them to understand that wasn't okay. She was quiet for the moment, then asked, Will we still see Uncle John? The question gave me pause. Despite everything, John was still her uncle, still my brother. That depends on Uncle John. If he wants to be in your life in a positive way, that door is open. As we drove home, a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying seemed to lift from my shoulders. For the first time in my life, I had stood up not just for myself, but for my daughter, breaking a pattern that had defined my existence for as long as I could remember. I didn't know what would happen next, whether my parents would reflect and change or double down on their favoritism. But I knew with absolute certainty that I had made the right choice, not just for Lily's well-being, but for her understanding of what family should truly mean. The days following our confrontation passed in a strange mix of liberation and grief. There were no calls from my parents, no attempts to understand or make amends. The silence confirmed what I had always suspected, but tried to deny their love, was conditional dependent on my acceptance of a family dynamic that consistently devalued me and now my daughter. Lily's health improved steadily with the prescribed medications, and within a week, she was back to her energetic self. She asked about her grandparents occasionally, but without the persistent longing I had feared. Perhaps she too had already begun to understand the imbalance in their affection. Sarah became an even more consistent presence in our lives, inviting us to Sunday dinners with her family, offering to watch Lily when I picked up extra shifts, bringing over homemade meals on days she knew I'd be too tired to cook. Her husband, Tom, took a special interest in Lily, teaching her to ride a bike without training wheels in our apartment complex parking lot, a milestone I had mentioned wanting to achieve that summer. "You two are family now," Sarah declared one evening as we shared dessert after Lily had gone to bed. "My kids adore Lily. Tom thinks she walks on water, and you're the sister I never had. Blood doesn't make a family, Delia. Showing up does." Her words resonated deeply, echoing the realization I had come to in my parents' living room. Family wasn't defined by genetics, but by consistent care, by prioritizing each other's well-being, by being present, not just for celebrations, but for struggles as well. 3 weeks after the hospital incident, I received a text message from my mother. "We miss Lily. Perhaps we could take her to the zoo this weekend. John has a new girlfriend he'd like her to meet." The message contained no acknowledgement of their behavior, no apology, not even a mention of missing me along with Lily. Just another attempt to maintain the status quo with John's new relationship taking center stage. I declined politely but firmly, reiterating that our relationship could only resume after a genuine conversation about the hospital incident. "You're being stubborn," came the reply. "Family conflicts should be forgiven and forgotten." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say to someone who viewed abandoning a hospitalized child as a mere conflict rather than a fundamental breach of trust and care. Instead, I channeled my energy into building a healthier support system for Lily and myself. I joined a support group for parents of children with chronic conditions, finding understanding and practical advice among people who truly comprehended the challenges we faced. Through this group, I met Marcus, a single father whose 8-year-old son had severe food allergies. We connected over shared experiences, exchanging tips for managing medical routines and the emotional weight of being solely responsible for a child's health. Our friendship grew gradually, rooted in mutual respect and understanding. At work, I approached my supervisor about reducing night shifts, explaining my need to be more present for Lily. To my surprise, she not only accommodated my request, but offered me a position on a new asthma education initiative, recognizing that my personal experience gave me unique insight. "Sometimes our greatest challenges become our greatest strengths," she told me. "Your understanding of what families go through isn't something that can be taught in nursing school." Lily blossomed in our expanded circle of support. Sarah's teenage children adored their role as honorary cousins, involving Lily in their activities and treating her with a genuine affection that made her glow. Marcus's son became a fast friend, the two children bonding over their shared experience of having extra rules to stay healthy. 2 months after our confrontation, I received a call from John. It was the first contact from any family member since my mother's text about the zoo. "I've been thinking," he began awkwardly. "Maybe I was a bit harsh that day at Mom and Dad's." I waited, unsure where this was leading. "Alicia says I should try to be a better uncle to Lily. She thinks family is important." It wasn't an apology, but it was an opening. "Family is important," I agreed. "But being family means showing up, being reliable, putting others' needs before your own sometimes." "Yeah, well, I'm trying to work on that. Alicia thinks I've been spoiled. Can you believe that?" I suppressed a laugh. "I might have mentioned something similar." A pause. "Would it be okay if I visited sometime just to see Lily? Maybe bring her a gift or something?" I considered the request carefully. John had been as much a product of our parents' dysfunctional favoritism as I had, though from the opposite perspective. Perhaps there was room for growth for a different kind of relationship than what our parents had modeled. "You can visit," I decided. "But I need you to understand something. Lily isn't an accessory to be remembered when it's convenient and forgotten when it's not. If you want to be in her life, you need to be consistent." "I can do that," he said with the easy confidence of someone who has never had to prove himself. "How about Saturday? Alicia and I could take her for ice cream." It was a small step, but a step nonetheless. I agreed to the visit, setting clear expectations about timing and duration. When Saturday arrived, to my surprise, John and Alicia showed up exactly when promised, bearing a thoughtfully chosen book about a little girl who becomes a doctor, clearly selected with Lily's interests in mind. The visit went surprisingly well. John, under Alicia's subtle guidance, engaged with Lily in a way I had never seen before, asking her questions about school and listening to her answers with apparent interest. Alicia, warm and genuinely kind, seemed to have a stabilizing effect on him, gently redirecting when he slipped into self-centered conversation. As they were leaving, John hesitated at the door. "For what it's worth, I think Mom and Dad were wrong to leave Lily at the hospital that day. I should have said something." It wasn't a full acknowledgement of the deeper patterns at work, but it was more self-awareness than I had ever heard from him. I nodded, accepting the partial olive branch for what it was. "Thank you for saying that. It means something." Over the following months, our lives settled into a new normal. John and Alicia became semi-regular visitors, though my brother's consistency still wavered. My parents remained distant, occasionally sending gifts for Lily with no accompanying note, their silence speaking volumes about their unwillingness to acknowledge any wrongdoing. I began attending therapy, working through the complex emotions of essentially losing my parents while trying to create a healthier environment for my daughter. My therapist helped me recognize patterns I had internalized from my upbringing, subtle ways I sometimes sought external validation or apologized for taking up space. "You're breaking a generational cycle," she told me during one session. "That's incredibly difficult and incredibly brave. The work you're doing now isn't just healing yourself, it's creating a different future for Lily." As Lily's 6th birthday approached, I planned a celebration with our chosen family, Sarah and Tom, their teenagers Marcus and his son, a few friends from Lily's class, and yes, John and Alicia. The party wasn't elaborate, just a gathering at a local park with games, cake, and the simple joy of being surrounded by people who genuinely cared about the birthday girl. The day before the party, I received a text from my mother. "We heard about Lily's birthday celebration tomorrow. Would it be all right if we stopped by? We've purchased a gift for her." I stared at the message for a long time, conflicting emotions churning inside me. There was still no acknowledgement, no apology, just an assumption that they could step back into our lives when it suited them. Yet they were Lily's grandparents, and despite everything, I had never wanted to sever that relationship completely. After careful consideration, I replied, "You're welcome to attend, but I want to be clear. This doesn't mean everything is resolved between us. Lily would be happy to see you, but we still need to have a real conversation about what happened and how things need to change moving forward." "We understand," came the response, though I doubted they truly did. The birthday party was a joyful affair with Lily surrounded by people who celebrated her with genuine enthusiasm. My parents arrived halfway through bearing an extravagant gift that made me wince inwardly, recognizing the pattern of using material items as a substitute for emotional presence. They were cordial but distant with me, focusing their attention on Lily, who received them with the uncomplicated happiness of childhood. I watched them carefully, noting how they still gravitated toward John when he arrived, how their conversation still centered around his activities and interests, even at an event meant to celebrate Lily. As the party wound down, Lily ran off to play one last game with the other children, and my mother approached me. "She looks happy," she observed. "You've done well with her." "Thank you," I replied, surprised by the rare compliment. "I know you think we don't care about Lily," she continued, "but we do love her, Delia." I took a deep breath. "I believe you love her in your way, Mom. But love isn't just a feeling, it's actions. It's showing up consistently, not just when it's convenient." "We've always done our best," she said, a defensive edge creeping into her voice. "Maybe," I conceded, "but your best included leaving a 5-year-old alone in the hospital to attend a birthday party. That's not acceptable, and I need you to understand that." My father joined us, having overheard the last part of our conversation. We knew she was receiving proper care. Perhaps our judgment wasn't perfect that day, but you've blown it out of proportion. It wasn't just that day, I said quietly. It was a pattern, one that's existed my entire life. John first, everyone else second. I accepted it for myself, but I won't accept it for Lily. She deserves to be valued, not just an afterthought. We value her, my mother insisted. We're here today, aren't we? Yes, you are, I acknowledged. And that's a start. But rebuilding trust takes more than showing up for cake and presents once a year. It takes consistent effort, it takes accountability, and most of all, it takes change. They exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. My father checked his watch, a familiar gesture that signaled his desire to escape emotional complexity. We should be going, he announced. Please tell Lily we said goodbye and that we love her very much. As they walked away, I felt a curious mixture of sadness and resolution. They were still my parents, still Lily's grandparents, but our relationship had fundamentally changed. I was no longer the daughter desperately seeking approval, willing to accept scraps of attention. I had become an advocate not just for myself, but for my child, setting boundaries that protected her sense of worth and belonging. In the months that followed, my parents made sporadic efforts to be part of our lives, always on their terms, never with the deep reflection or change I had hoped for. John surprisingly showed more growth, his relationship with Alicia seeming to open his eyes to perspectives beyond his own. Our sibling relationship remained complicated, but was slowly evolving into something more balanced than it had ever been. As for Lily and me, we thrived in our circle of chosen family. Her health remained stable with proper management, her confidence grew, and our bond deepened. The lessons I learned through standing up to my parents influenced every aspect of my parenting, making me conscious of ensuring Lily always knew her worth, wasn't determined by comparison to others, that she was loved unconditionally, exactly as she was. One evening, as I tucked her into bed, Lily asked a question that caught me off guard. Mommy, why don't Grandma and Grandpa visit us more? Don't they like us? I sat on the edge of her bed, considering how to answer truthfully without burdening her with adult complexities. They do like us, sweetheart. But sometimes, grown-ups have different ideas about how family should work. Grandma and Grandpa have some learning to do about making everyone feel important and loved. Like how you always come to my school plays even when you're tired from work? Exactly like that. I smiled, touched by her perception. Being there for the people we love, especially when they need us, is what makes a real family. She nodded thoughtfully. I think Sarah and Tom are like our family too then. And Marcus and Jake? They always come when we need them. You're absolutely right, Lily. Family isn't just about who you're related to. It's about who shows up, who makes you feel loved and valued, who stays by your side through hard times. As she drifted off to sleep, I reflected on the journey of the past year. The pain of confronting my parents, of acknowledging the limitations of their love, had been profound. But from that pain had come clarity, strength, and the determination to create a different reality for Lily than the one I had known. The family we had built around us might not share our blood, but they shared something far more important, a commitment to showing up, to prioritizing each other, to celebrating successes and providing support through challenges. They were the people who would never leave a child alone in a hospital for a birthday party, who understood that love was demonstrated through actions rather than words or gifts. In standing up to my parents that day, I had not only protected Lily, but had also begun my own healing. I was learning that I deserved the same unconditional regard that I fought for my daughter to receive, that the pattern of accepting less than I deserved could end with me. The road ahead would have its challenges, My relationship with my parents would likely always be complicated, shaped by decades of entrenched patterns that resisted change. But I faced that future with a newfound confidence, secure in the knowledge that I had created a different kind of family for Lily, one built on mutual respect, genuine care, and the simple but profound act of showing up when it matters most. It's been a year since that day in the hospital when my parents chose my brother's birthday over my daughter's health crisis. A year of growth, healing, and redefining what family means to us. I'm watching Lily now playing in our community garden with Sarah's kids and Marcus's son, her laughter floating across the warm summer air. At 6.5, she's thriving, despite her asthma, a resilient little soul who teaches me daily about joy and courage. The journey hasn't been easy. There have been moments of doubt, of grief, of questioning whether I made the right choice in setting such firm boundaries with my parents. But those moments grow fewer as I witness Lily blossoming in an environment where she knows without question that she matters. My parents still struggle to understand the line I've drawn. They visit occasionally bringing lavish gifts, but rarely the consistent presence that would truly make a difference. My mother called last week asking if Lily could attend John's wedding to Alicia next month. "Of course she's invited," she said. "She's family." "What about me?" I asked, not confrontationally but genuinely curious about her perception. "Don't be difficult, Delia. Of course you're invited too. You're his sister." The conversation illustrated how little had changed in her fundamental understanding of our family dynamics. In her mind, I was still being difficult for expecting equal consideration, still the problem for wanting acknowledgement of past wounds. Yet there has been progress in other areas. John, influenced by Alicia's more balanced perspective, has become a more consistent uncle to Lily. He remembers her birthday without prompting, asks about her interests, and recently attended her school science fair, seeming genuinely impressed with her project on how plants breathe. "You know," he told me afterward, "I think I was jealous of Lily for a while. Weird, right? Being jealous of a kid. But she's so smart like you were, and I guess I was used to being the center of attention in the family." It was the closest he'd come to acknowledging the dysfunctional patterns that had shaped our childhood, and though it wasn't a full reckoning, it felt like an important step. As for me, therapy has been transformative. I've learned to recognize the ways I internalized messages about my worth, how I became accustomed to putting others' needs before my own, how I apologized for taking up space. Breaking those patterns is ongoing work, but each small victory builds on the last. My friendship with Marcus has evolved into something deeper, a partnership built on mutual respect and understanding. He knows my history, understands my boundaries, and supports my journey without trying to rush the healing process. Our children get along beautifully, creating their own sibling-like bond that fills our blended family gatherings with laughter and occasional squabbles that feel refreshingly normal. The support group I joined has become another pillar in our lives. Being around other parents who understand the unique challenges of raising children with chronic conditions has been invaluable. Together, we share resources, strategies, and the emotional weight that comes with constantly monitoring a child's health. I've even started leading sessions for newly diagnosed families, sharing what I've learned both as a nurse and as a mother. The most profound change, though, has been in how I view the concept of family itself. I no longer see it as a fixed entity defined by biology, but as a living network of relationships built on choice, on showing up consistently, on prioritizing each other's well-being. Our chosen family has grown and evolved, creating a tapestry of support that surrounds Lily with love from all directions. Sarah and Tom host monthly dinners, where our collective children create chaos and memories. Marcus and I have established new traditions for holidays, blending our family's past practices into something uniquely ours. My co-workers have become friends who check in regularly, who understand when I need to reschedule due to Lily's health, who celebrate our successes without comparison or competition. Even my relationship with my parents, though still complicated, has evolved into something more honest. I no longer expect them to be different than they are to suddenly develop the capacity for introspection and change that they've never demonstrated. Instead, I accept the limited role they can play in our lives, while ensuring that Lily understands that their limitations aren't a reflection of her worth. Sometimes, people can only give what they know how to give. I explained to her recently when she asked why Grandma and Grandpa don't call more often. It doesn't mean they don't love you, but it does mean we need to find our special love from lots of different places. Like how Sarah makes my favorite soup when I'm sick, she asked. And how Marcus fixed my bike even though I'm not his real daughter. Exactly like that, I confirmed, marveling at her wisdom. Those are the actions that show real love, and we're lucky to have so many people who show us that kind of love every day. As I reflect on this year of transformation, I realize that the pain of that hospital day, the hurt of my parents' choice to leave Lily for a birthday party, ultimately catalyzed a profound healing. It forced me to confront patterns I had normalized, to advocate not just for my daughter, but for myself, to build boundaries that protect our emotional well-being. The family I have now might not match the traditional picture I grew up imagining, but it's richer, more authentic, and far more nurturing than what I experienced as a child. Lily is growing up surrounded by people who demonstrate through consistent actions that she matters, that her needs are important, that she is loved for exactly who she is, rather than what she achieves or how she compares to others. And perhaps, most importantly, I've broken a cycle. Lily will never wonder if she's enough, will never measure her worth against a sibling or cousin who receives preferential treatment, will never accept being abandoned in a moment of need as something she deserves. The other day, as I was helping her with homework, she looked up suddenly and asked, "Mommy, are you proud of me?" "Always," I answered without hesitation. "I'm proud of your kindness, your courage, your curiosity. I'm proud of how hard you try when things are difficult. I'm proud of who you are, not just what you do." She smiled, satisfied, and returned to her work. It was a simple exchange, but it represented everything I had fought for: her confidence in my love, her security in her own value, the absence of comparison or condition in my pride for her. That evening, as I tucked her into bed, she wrapped her arms around my neck and whispered, "I'm proud of you too, Mommy. You're the bravest person I know." In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that every difficult conversation, every boundary set, every painful realization had been worth it. We had created something beautiful from the broken patterns of the past, a family defined not by obligation, but by choice, not by biology, but by love in action. The journey continues, of course. There will be more challenging conversations with my parents, more growth in my relationship with John, more learning as Marcus and I build our blended family. But I face that future with confidence now, secure in the knowledge that true family shows up when it matters most. And as I look at the network of love surrounding us, at the people who would drop everything to sit by Lily's hospital bed, who celebrate her victories as if they were their own, who value her exactly as she is, I know we've found our real family, the one we chose, and the one that consistently chooses us in return. Have you ever had to stand up to family members to protect someone you love? What helped you find the strength to set those boundaries? Share your story in the comments below, And remember to like and subscribe for more honest conversations about family dynamics. Remember, sometimes the healthiest families are the ones we create, not the ones we're born into. Thank you for listening, and until next time, take care of yourself and those you love.